Mike and Jim are just incredible at having the vision for these builds and what, clearly as you've seen by how 40 some odd cars that we've debuted at SEMA over the years, you don't get that way by not just having an open vision to what the build is asking for and what the car is asking for.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. And greetings to all of you listening far and wide from places like Athens, Georgia, Bettendorf, Iowa, Newport Beach, California, Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, Leon, Mexico, and Dunboyne, Ireland. Thanks for joining me once again. And as this episode is dropping, we are in the midst of SEMA 2024. SEMA, of course, is the Specialty Equipment Market Association. Basically, it's the trade group for the automotive aftermarket and performance parts industry. And at their big Las Vegas trade show, every year you'll find everything from alloy wheels to intake manifolds. But the stars of SEMA are always the cars. And two of my favorite guys, Mike and Jim Ring, you know them as the Ringbrothers, always bring something to blow everyone away. And my guest today is Ryan Fielding. He's the Chief Fabricator for Ringbrothers, where he leads a tight-knit team of technicians to make high-performance dreams into reality. So today we're going to be going behind the scenes in the shop, and you'll hear about the builds that were unveiled at SEMA this week. But first, I want to mention, if you enjoy the podcast, support the show with a donation at buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. Consider a monthly gift of $2. That's just $1 per show, or a larger amount of your choice. It all goes back into bringing you great stories and interviews. And thanks to those of you who've already donated. Again, that's buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Also, subscribe to Horsepower Heritage on YouTube, where you'll find not only every episode of the podcast, but also standalone videos about other automotive stuff. All right, stay right there. I've got Ryan Fielding from Ringbrothers, and that's coming up right after this. Guys, you know what time of year it is. Yes, that's right. It's time to start your Christmas shopping. Never too early. And why not surprise your friends and family with scale models from Model Citizen Diecast? How about the Porsche 911 GT3R in the bright green AO Racing 2024 Daytona 24 Hours T-Rex livery? Yeah, it looks like a dinosaur. That's in 1/43rd scale by Spark, and it'll make a great stocking stuffer. Or how about a 1953 Porsche 356 Pre-A Coupe in big 1/18th scale by Solido, finished in a deep dark blue. These and many more gift ideas await at modelcitizendiecast.com. Use promo code HERITAGE and get 10% off your order. Limitations apply. Whether it's race cars or road cars, it's Model Citizen Diecast for Christmas, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. All right, I always love talking with anyone from the Ringbrothers way up there in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Ryan Fielding, Chief Fabricator, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely, Maurice. Thank you so much for having me. We're excited to talk here. We're a couple days out from SEMA, and we're really looking forward to getting into this.
I'm killing myself because I really wanted to make it this year. It just wasn't in the cards, but I was really hoping to see the unveiling of your latest creations at SEMA. Incidentally, in case people don't know, SEMA is this week, November 5th through the 8th. And Ryan and I are recording this basically just days before the show. So what's cool about that is we're going to be able to get into detail on the cars that you're unveiling at the show this year, because this episode will be coming out after the tarps come off the cars at the show. So
Right. No, that's great. You know, a lot of times we have to tiptoe around what exactly we're bringing and what those cars have, and it's nice to actually be prior to the unveil to be able to talk about it. It's pretty exciting, and we've got some exciting stuff to show this year. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
By the way, is it difficult for you guys to keep everything under wraps? I mean,
it is. You know, with the fact that everybody has a cell phone these days, and if they wanted to, they could, you know, drive by the shop just about any day and, you know, pull into the parking lot, snap a picture of something that we're hoping to keep secret for a year, sometimes a year and a half. We're real fortunate that most people seem to respect that. And, you know, when we have people in the shop and they ask about taking pictures, you know, we put a lot of faith in folks saying that they will not post it or not share it, you know, because I think people understand that it's a pretty special thing to be able to unveil these cars. And we get a little bit more particular about it the closer it gets to done time, especially once they leave the body shop, right? And you can see final color and trim color and these sort of things. That's where we really get particular about it. Before it gets to the body shop, it's not such a problem, but once they start to come together and look pretty close to what they're going to in their final rendition, we get pretty cautious about people taking pictures. And again, because you can post it all over the internet, you know, instantaneously, and that's tough to keep a handle on.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, everybody is curious, right? And spy photographers, I'm sure, sometimes lurking around the shop, right?
Well, you know, and it's funny too, this time of year, we have, you know, a number of great customers and friends that they know that, you know, a couple weeks towards the end of October, that stuff's going to be wrapping up, and there'll be people that we haven't seen all year that, you know, they'll swing in like, all right, what do you guys got? And we're always happy to show them. But, you know, everybody knows that end of October, number one, it's chaos, right, in the shops. And number two, there's a high probability they're going to see something pretty cool. And so that's fun, you know, when we get people we've known for decades that swing in to make that visit, you know, some old timers and young folks alike. They know that end of October is when you're going to see something special here in Spring Green, and they'll show up to try to get a little peek. And usually we're happy to oblige and take them and show them what we got.
Right on. Well, Ryan, being a blue collar guy, your resume is different, right? Because other industries, you don't necessarily get to see the physical representation of what you do all day, if that makes sense. I mean, if you're a welder or a fabricator or a painter, what have you, your resume is right there in front of everyone to see. And I think that's really cool. Before we started recording, you and I were talking about how important it is to pass these trades on to the next generation. I know that's a subject that is important to you, but what kind of stuff was on your resume when you hooked up with Mike and Jim? What do you suppose it was that they saw in you?
You know, I've had a pretty interesting run of things in my life. And, you know, I had my own shop, and I had, you know, well, going back even further. So I went to engineering school and decided that, you know, I just needed to be more hands-on, and I stepped away from that and started my own shop. And I had that for going on about 20 years. And as far as that leads me to Mike and Jim. So I was just up the road about a half an hour with my shop, and primarily focused on custom motorcycles, hot rods, and fabrication and sculpture, and a lot of metalwork and you know, a lot of the same kind of skills that we use here daily building cars, but a lot more varied. And of course, we were friends and known each other for decades. We both went to the same high school, just, you know, 15 years apart or so. And you know, it was real interesting. You know, we'd stay in touch, and we'd see each other at SEMA, or we'd you know, I was one of those guys that would come down in the fall to see what the brothers were bringing to SEMA, you know, and we had kicked around the idea of working together a number of times over the years, and kind of teaming up on that. And I tell you what, there was a day a number of years ago, and I got a phone call from Mike, and he and I had a real nice long conversation, and essentially convinced me to hang it up at my own shop, hang a close sign on the door, and come build cars with him. So that's where we're at. But you know, all of those things leading up to, I mean, even going back to high school with shop teachers and welding instructors and machining instructors, you know, we're real lucky here in Spring Green that we had a heck of a vocational department in our high school. And that stuff, that really lays the groundwork for being excited about this industry and what we do. And for myself, I was pretty fortunate to be technically third generation. So my grandfather was a hot rod builder, my father as well. And I hung out in my dad's shop as a kid, and my dad hung out in his dad's shop, and that all just kind of passed down naturally, right? But those things led me to want to do more with that. And that, that was really the birth of that kind of inspiration to be into this. And I tried to, go to college and be an engineer and not be building cars. But I tell you what, it gets in your blood, and it just pulls you back. And it didn't take long before I knew that that's where I needed to be.
I saw you posted an old newspaper clipping of your grandfather, whose name was Rusty Fielding, right?
Right.
And so he was a hot rodder and customizer in the 50s, wasn't he?
Right. Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's wild, and he did, so he was with a stunt show too called Jimmy Lynch and the Death Dodgers. So they were, they traveled around to state fairs and county fairs and that sort of thing, jumping over cars and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But, seeing some of the old black and white pictures of them building hot rods like in the 50s, right? I mean, that was when guys like, Barris and Roth and all these guys were doing their thing out on the West Coast. That was really the birth of this industry was in those days. And it's real special to me to know that my grandfather was one of those guys that was tearing stuff apart, as soon as it came out of the dealership. Let's get a 50 Mercury in 1950 and then start cutting it up immediately. That's great.
And figuring it out, right? Because technical schools weren't necessarily teaching. There wasn't the background, right? There wasn't the hot rod heritage necessarily, or custom heritage at the time.
Right. Well, that, and the other thing too that is pretty incredible to think about is those guys. There was no Summit or Jegs or the internet or any of these things where they can just, I need an adapter, for this. If they wanted to put a transmission from a Chrysler behind a small block Chevy, they just had to figure it out. And there was some pretty ingenious stuff that came out of those days on making stuff work. And those guys they were all about big power and stuff looking cool. And they just had to figure it out. And that's where, so much of what we see coming out of those days is so wild and crazy because there was no rule book. Nobody had done it before. So you had all sorts of different ideas and people going at things different ways. And they came up with some really interesting stuff that's, it's still, you look at it and it's cutting edge even today sometimes on some of the crazy stuff these guys came up with because they didn't know any better, honestly.
Yeah, they didn't order out of a catalog. They went to the wrecking yard and found what they could and made it work.
Right.
And kind of interesting too, like you talk about West Coast versus Midwest or even
Sure.
East Coast. They all kind of figure out the same thing independently, which was, we want to get parts from a LaSalle because they're really robust, good transmissions. Or we want to pull, like another example is when the Hemis came out in the early 50s. That was like the ticket, right? The overhead valve caddy and the Chrysler Hemis.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
they all kind of independently arrived in the same areas, but then they all had their own different spin or flavor. And you had like a West Coast style, East Coast style, Midwest. I love it.
Absolutely. It's pretty interesting, like, just like you're saying, even with, when you look at like paint jobs and stuff, right? Like everybody was kind of doing their own thing, but at the same time, everybody kind of seemed to know what was cool and everybody had a different take on it, right? You could pick out a Larry Watson paint job or, Gene Winfield or these guys. But they all kind of fell into the same vibe. Just everybody had their own little take on it, which I just find so fascinating and so interesting. What a time, those guys came up in, and we're so lucky that, Gene, he's one of the last ones that's still with us that was there for the beginning. And that's just so special. I'm real proud to have met Gene and talked with him a number of times, and just a heck of a guy and what an ambassador for our industry, really.
Yeah. And he's had a rough time of it in the last year and a half or so.
Yes.
I don't know if people are aware of what we're talking about. Gene Winfield, who I think is 96 now. And one of the last of the old school, original West Coast customizers and hot rodders. So obviously you and Mike and Jim go back a long way. And I know that their bread and butter has been collision, right?
Right.
But it sounds like you didn't do much of that. You were really focused on custom stuff and really
Yeah. So for myself, I tell you what, one of the pieces of advice I got was, it was as related to starting my shop, and part of what one of the things that my father actually told me was he was worried about about it becoming something that becomes work, right? And people always say if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. That's great, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And we had a long conversation about that before I started my shop when I was thinking about starting it. And one of the things that I really tried to focus on from the beginning was that I was going to do custom work only. And I was pretty adamant about that. And, when you're starting out, you have to do a lot of side stuff that you wouldn't normally do. But as long as I found it interesting, I was okay with it. So, my motto was always anything custom. I don't care what it is. And that was from, I custom painted KitchenAid mixers for little old ladies that wanted their mixer to look like Alton Brown's from television, because his is all pinstriped and cool and like candy flaked and stuff. Stuff like that, and just all kind of crazy wild stuff. And that from the beginning for me, keeping it interesting to myself and keeping my creativity kind of on the forefront, and letting that be what drove each project. That was real important to me. And I was real fortunate, when I started my shop, that the industry was, as a whole, was at a point where it supported that kind of business concept, right? I know that wasn't necessarily the case, say, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where, there just wasn't that many people that wanted that level of custom work that you could support, that being all you did, right? So I think the time frame that we live in, where more and more people are interested in custom work, whether it be cars or motorcycles or custom paint or any of these things, it's really nice, and that helped spur all that along.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? That because we're not talking about a cheap endeavor. I mean, we're not talking about necessarily an affordable endeavor. This kind of work, the level of detail, full disassembly, design, and build, it's not cheap. But
right, it gets up there. It's definitely a want, not a need. These are luxury items for people, and it's so exciting for us to be able to, make people's dreams come true. Honestly, and as cliche as that sounds, it's really the case. So many of the times when we talk to these customers, they've had these visions in their mind for years or decades, and they're finally at a point where they can really go all out, and that's exciting. To feel their excitement in the project, especially when we really get rolling, right? We talk all these ideas in the beginning, and then it's a little bit of time to get the donor car and get the chassis and get these things set up. But once we really start getting after it with the, with the custom parts, and if we're machining or we're custom fabricating in sheet metal, or we're doing carbon, even when we're getting the renderings back and these sort of things, just to see the excitement that the customer has, it's really special. And to be a part of that, to be right there with them on each one of these builds, it inspires me. Every single project we do, I feel more inspired at the end of it than I did on the project before. And it keeps multiplying, right? Because every time you work on a car or work with a customer, you yourself are learning, and hopefully, you are coming up with new ideas, and that technology is kind of matching, as you're going through these projects, right? Where, 10 years ago, we didn't think about 3D printing like we do now.
Right.
We've got one in our machine shop, and it's amazing. It existed. I think it was called rapid prototyping at that point. The first time I was involved with it, I feel is, I don't know, maybe it's 15 years ago or so. And it was called rapid prototyping. And it was like a balsa based kind of platform where it built up these things in layers. And and that was neat, but it was kind of science fiction to where now, we've got one in the back and we can sit down with some of our guys and draw something up. And, the next morning we've got a part that we can hold in place and see if we like it before we make it in steel. And that's just incredible. And that technology just keeps going. And it's real exciting to be a part of.
Boy, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you're absolutely right. It was a method of testing a part before you committed to production, right? So you might print it in plastic or what have you, and then offer it up to the car, make sure it fit, make sure it was doing what it was supposed to do. And then you could go to a manufacturer and say, hey, we need molds for this, and can you cast it for us? But now we're at the point where you print a production part out of metal. Sure. Just absolutely incredible. On the one hand, it might make your job easier with emerging technologies, but by the same token, it's something new to learn. And it sounds like you're the kind of guy who gets excited about it. You embrace it rather than thinking, oh man, now I've got to figure this out. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I tell you what, we have an amazing team here, and I will be the first to mention and admit that I'm of a certain age. I'm not old. I'm not up there with Gene Winfield just yet, but I'm of a certain age where it definitely shows when it comes to technology sometimes between, say, myself and some of our new young guys. So we're real fortunate to have some real young guys that are, they were born with this stuff, right? Like they sync with technology in just a pretty incredible way. It's so natural and fluid that I 100% embrace it, and I love it. But we've got some really smart guys on our team that we can kind of do a cardboard paper napkin sketch, and they doodle it up, and they can really fly with that technology. And the learning curve seems to be pretty short for those guys on any time we have this emerging technology, and it's really great. And I think they get excited about it too, because then they're able to see these products in these builds, and that's it's inspiring for everybody, honestly. When we can rely on some of these guys that have the technology background on working with stuff like the 3D printing and just designing in SolidWorks and having a viable part in the next day is pretty incredible.
Oh, definitely. And there's a place for cardboard templates, right? And masking tape and all of that. But also, it's nice when you can streamline the process. I talked with Mike and Jim quite a bit about that when they were on the show. So how long have you been with the Ringbrothers now, Ryan?
So I'm going on 4 years here with Mike and Jim at Ringbrothers. But again, we've known each other for quite a period of time. And it's funny, going back quite a ways, Madam V, I don't know if you remember Madam V, the 48 Cadillac. So I actually had done a small amount of work on that car through my own shop when they were doing the badging that lights up in the hood that had the Cadillac emblem that was backlit, and the one in the trunk as well, and a few other things. So they had made those, and I did the pinstriping and some of the paint work on those. So it's kind of funny, everything comes full circle. And even going back, I found a newspaper clipping that I think I think my mom had saved, but it was something from Mike and Jim, a car they had done, and the to show you how far ago this was, the RB logo didn't exist yet. It was just the R, and it had the full phone number with the 608, the area code and everything on the logo. But I had painted one of those, and that had to be 20 some odd years ago. And, all through that time, we never would have thought that this is where our paths would have collided and put us together, building some pretty special cars together. But it's funny to look back and see all the kind of the foreshadowing that came about. Now that's pretty neat.
It is. And as far as Mike and Jim go, they're like the textbook case of working your whole life to become an overnight success, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, right.
When they came on the national scene, it was a pretty big deal. All of a sudden, who are these dudes, right? And one of the things that I'll remember most about discovering the Ringbrothers was that crazy Winnebago build.
Sure.
and also the Prestone Javelin.
Yeah. The Javelin was a cool car.
Those are two of my most favorite builds. But what's been your favorite build?
Well, I tell you what, Enyo was a really special truck.
Oh yeah.
That one was a lot of fun, just because it's so far out of the box for anything that Ringbrothers had done, and honestly anything that anybody had done.
It's like an F1 car with a Chevy pickup body.
48 Chevy pickup on it. Yep, that one was a lot of fun. They're all so great. Honestly, every build we do, you get to hone your skills and you build these really cool parts, and we work as a team. If it's the guys in the fab shop, if it's the guys in the machine shop, the body shop, everybody has input. Everybody is excited about these builds, and it's really fun for us. Especially when we'll kind of sit in the morning, Mike and Jim and all of us in the fab shop, and we'll look at these projects and talk about where we see it going, and that's where we really kind of spitball some ideas and whiteboard some stuff of what if we do this and what if we do that, and then we get into the day and we've got our tasks in front of us, but just kind of hanging out at the beginning, at the end of the day, as a group, as a team, and there's no wrong ideas, right? You just kind of, you see stuff and you say it, and maybe we kind of earmark one of those things, and we run with it. That makes it really exciting. But every one of those cars, even if it's not as crazy as Enyo, those opportunities exist for trying to do something better, more efficient, more effective, and at the end of it, to look as aesthetically pleasing and as cool as it possibly can, right? So we're constantly trying to refine what we think cool is and refine the Ringbrothers look. And at the same time, with every single build, we are trying to come up with new parts to produce to allow other people to build these cars. That happened with one of the SEMA builds this year. Actually, a few parts came out of the SEMA builds from this year, and that was just out of necessity, right? We were looking at it, how do we do this, and that was one of those where we, kind of napkin sketch, cardboard template, and then pretty soon we're making a prototype and then putting it in the car, and it works and great. And now we've got them in production and available for sale. So it's exciting when you come up with these ideas and you're able to produce a new part that can help other people that are building the same car,
Right, because you guys do offer parts for sale, signature Ringbrothers line of parts. And it's interesting that, along the way you make these discoveries and innovate and then offer them to the general public. That's very cool. You mentioned like a signature Ringbrothers look, and the way I would characterize that, and let's take Enyo out of the equation, right? Because that thing is just pretty outrageous, but it's clearly not, no one's going to mistake that for a production vehicle. But most of the Ringbrothers builds, at first glance, you kind of hesitate. Like, what is that exactly? Something's different about it. On the surface, it sort of looks like others, but and then it dawns on you, oh no, there's something really special about this one. Right. Like, let's take the Rolls Royce that's a great example. Let's talk about this car. Tell me about it.
So 61 Rolls Royce, Silver Cloud 2. That was a fun car. So it's on a Roadster Shop chassis. And essentially that started as we're going to put a chassis drivetrain, and that'd be it. And it turned into a full SEMA build is what happened. But yeah, from the outside, it looks like a beautifully restored Rolls Royce. And then whoever's driving it stands on it, and you hear that supercharger whine, and it leaves anything that's sitting next to it in, on the side of the road, that something else is going on. But, that was a really fun build. And the customer that we built that for, he was real excited about the whole thing. He's a Rolls Royce guy. He's got a new one. There's actually a video. I don't know if you saw that one that we released when we released the car, but we were drag racing. Mike and Jim were drag racing the brand new Rolls Royce and the 61 at the airport. And, yeah, they had a blast. It's so fun when those guys when we get them out in the cars and it's like their 16-year-old brothers. Well, I mean, they're still brothers, always going to be brothers, but it's like they're 16 again, right? And they're drag racing mom and dad's car or something like that. But
I would have given anything to be there that day when you guys were shooting that. It looked like so much fun.
Yeah, it was a blast. And the owner was there with his wife and they were just all smiles and taking pictures because, he's got, and it was his new Rolls Royce and then the old one drag racing. And they just had a blast with it. And Mike and Jim had a blast. It was really fun.
Ryan, what are the specs on that car? Just so people understand, like.
Yeah. So it's LT4, supercharged LT4 in it with a 10-speed behind it. Push button shift, and then Roadster Shop chassis, independent all the way around. It's one of the fast track chassis. Bowler did the transmission, and all of everything under the skin is modernized, right? So all the HVAC system, the all the gauges, Dakota Digital and Vintage Air unit, and the interior is just incredible. Everything underneath the sheet metal is bespoke, is all special and custom to that car. But again, like you said, at first glance, like, oh, it's a very nice Rolls Royce. And then you start to notice, especially if you're a Rolls Royce guy, and that goes for any car. I can talk about like the Charger with things that Charger guys picked out last year at SEMA that most people didn't. But if I would have guys that, like, I've got a 69 Charger, how did you do that? Or why is this like that? And that's what's interesting. The same thing with the Rolls Royce, because everything was smoothed or changed just a little bit. But I tell you what, on the outside, we didn't have to do much because Rolls Royce, they know what they're doing with styling, right?
Yes.
But everything under, that's where we really took the time to kind of smooth and refine everything we could and modernize it.
Here's how I would characterize this car. If you wanted to, you could take a nice, comfortable ride in the back of the car and maybe have a little lunch, and you could spread your Grey Poupon mustard on your ham sandwich. But if the chauffeur decided to mash his foot on the floor, you'd be wearing that sandwich in about half a second.
Absolutely. Yep. It was a fast car. It was a fun car to drive, I tell you what.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has no problem getting going.
I also love the fact that you guys, oftentimes, your builds are unexpected. That's what's cool about the Rolls build, the Aston Martin build, the Winnebago build. So lots of neat stuff. Earlier, Ryan, you mentioned that, you come in and you have a little bit of a meeting in the morning. Is that a typical morning at Ringbrothers? Like, you guys are kind of standing around with your coffee?
That's exactly how it works out. Yeah. We all usually get into the shop around a half hour before we start our work day. And that, lets everybody, just kind of talk, if we're talking about the football game or what, whatever the case is. But the conversation inevitably turns to what we've got in the shop. And, it's real cool because we've got, guys from the machine shop and guys from the body shop and guys in the fab shop. We're all kind of standing in the fab shop generally and having our coffee and talking and looking at what, was done the day before and what we plan on doing that day. And, that's where a lot of those ideas, get talked out. Right. And same with, Mike and Jim, they're so great about just having an open vision to what, what the build is really calling for. And we a lot of times, don't have that hard line of this is what's going to happen here or there. We may have an overall scope that's pretty tied down, but as far as the intricate details, that's a lot of stuff that we work through as we're going through the builds, and Mike and Jim are just incredible at having the vision for these builds and what, clearly as you've seen by how 40 some odd cars that we've debuted at SEMA over the years. You don't get that way by not just having an open vision to what the build is asking for and what the car is asking for. A lot of times those things kind of present themselves to you as you're building the car. You'll look at it and you're like, boy, that's just screaming for this, or it's really, that car is really asking to get, another inch taken out of it, or whatever the case is. Right. And that's where we have a lot of times those conversations, because once the day gets started, then we've got our list of things we have to get through. And that's what we're working on. And we're trying to hit those goals each day, but in the morning and in the evening, we can kind of relax and spitball some of these ideas. And that's where where a lot of times we come up with some pretty wild stuff. Not all of it comes to fruition, but we definitely talk about some wild things.
No, I mean, I think that's what makes a shop special and sets it apart, right? Because you're not coming in and punching the clock and getting straight to work. In other words, it's not a grist mill sort of atmosphere. Right. You know, you've got camaraderie, and some ideas work and some don't. But I mean, that's where the magic happens, right? Yeah. And in those maybe a 5 or 10 minute bull session, and you figure something really cool out.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of what if we did this, or, you know, those things are really, that's where we all get real excited, right? Cause you can just kind of throw those things out there, and then you grab some tag board and some tape, and you start laying something out quick, and we all agree like, yeah, let's try that. And you go for it, you know, and that's where a lot of these ideas come from is just those sessions where it's something you really hadn't thought about, but yet it just all of a sudden it's there, and it's asking to be done, and we go for it. You know, that's one of the great things with the clients that we are so fortunate to work with, that they so often give us the latitude to just do what we do. Right. You know, and we'll run some of those things by, and like, hey, you guys, you know, make it cool, man. Like, you know what you're doing. So that's real exciting when we have those customers that allow for that creativity and allow for us to make those assessments and come up, you know, and just run with those ideas as they present themselves, because that's where everybody gets real excited when, you know, we kind of all collaboratively come up with a direction, and then we just run with it, right? Because we're all excited and it's cool, and we just get after it. And that's really what drives, I think, everybody, you know, building these cars is having that one part or that one moment or that one section of car where you're just like, you can't get enough. You don't want to go home, and you do go home, you eat, you go to sleep, and you're back here as soon as you can, because you just can't wait to get your hands back on that car, you know. And that happens, I think, for all of us on every build at some point, right? There's some part of it, and it's usually different for each one of us, where you just can't get enough. And it's you know, I think that's what we all live for, right? Is getting to that point on these cars where you know, you're building something and you're just loving it, and you're loving the way it's coming out, and everything's flowing and everything's vibing, and it really, you know, it really sets the tone for the shop and the build.
You know, another thing I like is seeing under the skin of what you guys are doing. And one example would be you guys had a fastback Mustang project where you had to widen the car, I think, by 1 inch, and you fabricated these incredible wheel wells and all of the structure underneath the body in the mostly in the rear, I think, is where you had to do a lot of serious fabrication, right? But there's so much structure and geometry that is invisible once it's all done, right? It's all under the skin, but I don't think people realize how much work there is that they don't see at the end of the day.
Right. You know, and that goes to, like you were talking about, you know, what makes a Ringbrothers car. And, you know, so often you'll hear, I knew it was a Ringbrothers car before I saw the sticker or saw the sign or something like that. And it's hard to define what that is. And one of the things is that from the outside, as you said, a lot of times you can't tell exactly what's been changed. You know, something's different, but you don't know exactly what it is. And one of the things for sure, to your point about what's underneath, when you look at it, you absolutely don't know all of the things that went on underneath, because it's you know, with, again, Enyo aside, that one you could kind of see the guts of it. But, you know, on a standard build, once everything's all together, you no longer see that. So like on that Mustang one that you're talking about, you know, where we had some shots of it all apart and without the body on there, it's a lot. There's a lot that goes on to make those minor adjustments. And on that one, yeah, we're only widening it. It was about 1.5 inches on either side. And, but because of that 1.5 inches, everything between has to grow. And, you know, and everything was made custom and specific for that car. And yeah, once it's all sheet metal and interior and wheels and tires, you no longer see all that. But there's a lot that's underneath there, and it's, you know, that's where a lot of the you know, you talk about learning on the job and with our new guys and stuff. That's where a lot of that can happen, right? Is you're starting with a bare chassis, and then we're building it up. And, that's, you're really in it from the very beginning. It's not just, here's a car and okay, we take off the fender and do this, that, or the other, but we're starting at the bare chassis and building up for there. And I think, I think that's a great way to get some of these younger guys involved and excited and learn, is to see it from nothing all the way to a done car that, here in a few days, we're going to be debuting in SEMA, right?
Yeah. And, powertrain is obviously a huge factor in any build. So you kind of build the car around the powertrain in a lot of cases, but maybe even more important is the underpinning, the suspension, wheels and tires, the brakes. You got to fit all that. You don't want a squirrely car at the end of the day, or an unsafe car.
Yeah. And that's, and so many of those, we, that's where we end up moving the wheelbase forward. So like on, say that Mustang, we moved that one ahead, I think it was like 1.5 inches or so, on the Cuda, this year. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but that's one of the cars that we're bringing to Las Vegas. Yeah. So that one, we moved the wheelbase ahead 1.5 inches on, like the Charger last year. That one, I think we were 3 inches forward on that car. And that all has to do with how we want the car to look, but also handling, right? So, we can get that engine that much further back behind the front tires, like all the better. The Roadster Shop chassis with the suspension setup that we have independent all the way around, does an amazing job. And you talk about building around a drivetrain. I'll talk about the Cuda a little bit more real quick on that. That car is a transaxle car. So you're designing a whole chassis around the drivetrain, where your transmission and rear end are in the back of the car, and your engine's in the front, and you got a torque tube connecting through the middle, and everything's different from what you're used to when you're building a car, right? If you're putting in a 6-speed and behind a Hemi or whatever the case is, that all changes when you go to a transaxle car with with torque tube and a transaxle in the back. So that all comes in play, and then you're really shifting your weight front and rear, and the suspension setup that you need to make that handle properly there's a lot of engineering that goes into that before we even, before we take out one grinder or fire up the welder. There's a lot of engineering and figuring out that has to be done suspension wise and drivetrain wise to put those things together.
Well, Ryan, since you're breaking the seal a little bit here on the 2024 SEMA creations, why don't we get right into that? So how many builds?
So this year we're bringing 3 cars.
Okay.
We've got a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda. That car is named Infected, and I'll get into that a little bit. So the reason it's called Infected, so it's got a red eye, one of the Chrysler crate motor, the red eye, 807 horse. I forget, 700 some odd foot-pounds of torque. And as you'll see, we painted that car very bright pink. It's Mike Ring's take on Panther Pink. He took some Panther Pink and then he played with it and really gave it some spice, and it popped. I really love that color. So it's based on that, but he tweaked it, made it his own. Really special car, really special color. But and that's the one with the transaxle. But that red eye sitting in there, one day Jim was looking at it and he's like, well, red eye, car's pink. You ought to call it pink eye. So that's kind of where that started. We made custom valve covers that say pink eye on it instead of red eye. And then that turned into naming the car Infected. And the logo, on the Infected, it's got a big eyeball and it's all pink and kind of gnarly looking. So that's a really fun car. Then we've got an 87 Grand National.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Exactly. That was a fun car to do. Kenny Duttweiler, I don't know if that name rings any bells for you, but he built the engine on that car, and he's a big time engine builder, big time turbo guy, and he took this little 3.8 and he got 1,246 horsepower out of this V6.
Holy smokes!
So it's twin turbo, precision turbo, 66 millimeter precision, symmetrical mirrored turbos, and 1,246 at the crank on the dyno at 32 pounds of boost. Kenny says that engine capable taking upwards of 50 pounds of boost, and you'd be pushing like 2,000 horsepower out of the thing. It was just insane on a V6, right? But so a lot of that car focused on the drivetrain, but it's a beautiful car overall. A lot of custom touches, and it's one of those that for sure, when you see it, you'll know that it's exactly like what you and I talked about earlier with, you can't tell what's been done, but you know a lot's been done.
Right.
That's one of those where it 100% looks like a Grand National, but Grand National people will pick out 100 little things that they weren't that way from Buick. They should have been, hopefully. Hopefully that's what, what people think, but, we definitely do. And that makes it real fun. And the last one that we're bringing this year, 72 K5 Blazer. And that one's pretty special in the regard that, a couple things we haven't done before with, we've done a lot of Blazers, and this one is the first one with a top. So all the other ones we've done have either had kind of a, like a bikini top kind of deal, or a permanent hard top, but no windows, no side glass, that sort of thing. And this one is a fully functional topper that's still removable, and really cool Blazer. We did some special stuff with that topper. So one of the things we grafted in, well, first we chopped the topper 2 inches, just like you would chop a top on a car. We chopped the topper 2 inches to take some of that kind of head heaviness down of the topper on those. And then grafted in a panoramic sunroof from a 22 Blazer. So it's the entire top of the topper is glass, and
nice.
It tracks just like in a new Blazer. And then on the back side of that topper, we grafted in it's an 18 and newer Jeep Wrangler topper hatch. So on the Blazers in 72 with the rear glass, would have had a big surround of fiberglass and this big latch kind of deal that you lifted up. We got rid of that, so it's like a late model car where it's just the glass that is now your hatch. And again, that came from a late model Jeep, that glass in the surround, and we grafted all that in and laid it down at that same angle like the Blazers have, and it really came out with a cool look. And then we did a swing out gate on it instead of a drop gate, like you would normally have a drop down tailgate on those Blazers. We did a swing gate like a new Bronco Blazer, and that's all these things we hadn't done before. And that goes back to, like we were talking, on every one of these builds, even if you've done Blazers before, coming up with new ideas, new ways to do things, new things that you think look cool. And this one had a lot of those.
That's super slick. Now, that's exactly what we were talking about, man. I don't know who came up with the idea. Oh, hey, that Jeep glass is about the right dimension.
So yeah, that one, it just kind of came about. We were spitballing ideas as a group and with the owner, honestly, and a few of us here have Jeep Wranglers, including the gentleman that we built this Blazer for, and we were just looking at it as a sense of like, hey, we want to do this glass, right? Like a late model has, and like, oh, as a, for instance, on a Jeep, right? So we're talking with him and said, well, I got a Jeep and sitting on the parking lot. Let's go look at it. So we're on speakerphone and he's looking at his and we're looking at the one out in our parking lot, and like, yeah, something like that. Well, it turned from something like that into, why don't we just use that? Right. Sure. And so we got one from, a salvage yard to take off, whatever it was, we bought a topper. We just needed that back glass and some of the, the mechanisms around it and whatnot. And we didn't know. I remember specifically having the conversation with the owner that, like, well, we haven't done it before, but we'll give it a shot, and I think it'll work. We thought, looking at it, that it was going to work, but you don't know until you start cutting, right?
It's always wise to under promise and over deliver.
Right. And we really didn't. You can measure and you can come up with your best ideas of how something's going to look, but until you actually cut the thing up and lay it in there, you really don't know for sure. And that was one of those where, like, oh, let's go for it, see what we got. And we got cutting into it and laid that up in there, and it immediately, like, oh yeah, this is gonna look cool.
No, it sounds really good. And also the fact that you chopped it, I can see it right. I can see it in my mind's eye right now. Like, of course it needs to be chopped. It needs to be sleeker and look a little bit more modern and slippery,
and one of the things too that, that, like we were talking about, people missing a lot of times, and Blazer people would pick up, maybe not others. So part of the reason we chopped that top was that we always raised the bedside on those Blazers. So if you, look at a 70 Blazer, 72, whatever, and have the topper off, the door is about 2 inches taller than the bedside, and that's just how they were. The topper it jogged up, and that's just what they were. Well, it doesn't look that great when the topper's off.
No.
So we build that bedside up by that 2 inches to make it even with the door all the way around. Well, then in doing so, now you're making that topper even taller. So that's where we're cutting out, and that slimmed down the windows and slimmed down the topper itself, and kind of gave a new profile to the top. And it really makes a difference. But it's one of those that you don't, it's not in your face. You don't see it immediately.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Original body versus what you guys have done.
Right.
And the Grand National, got to get back to that for a second, because if people don't remember, I'm old enough to remember that the Grand National GNX was the fastest production car in like 1987.
Yeah.
With 300 horsepower. But this was coming out of the Melees era, right? Where everything had been detuned. I mean, you were lucky to get 200 horsepower out of a small block Chevy,
right,
in the 80s, and that was like considered a performance car in the Camaro and whatnot. And so Buick was like, hold my beer, and they had this V6, which people initially laughed at. That's a V6, but yeah, fastest production car in like 87.
Yeah.
So it's kind of become legendary already, but then to take that and put the Ringbrothers spin on it is really cool.
Yeah, we had some fun building that car. Again, it was a lot of it was based around that drivetrain, and then after that, it was doing all the refinements that we felt necessary to the car. We built a custom front end for it. Everything from the grill and headlights down was custom built in sheet metal aluminum, and it just gave a different look. It still screams Grand National, but it's refined. We just came up with something a little bit different in the front. We did the same in the rear, where they would have normally had the plastic bumpers and all those plastic guards and everything. We got rid of all that, and we built it in aluminum. Same thing with the front air dam. We built that all in aluminum. We flush mounted the quarter windows, got rid of that big trim around there. And then of course, in true Ringbrothers fashion, we stuffed some big tires and some beautiful HRE wheels under there, and gave it a stance that, it's super aggressive. It looks awesome. We've got carbon in that car. So it's a standard, stock Grand National hood, but we did a carbon insert in front of the bump that it's got on the hood, like your little hump up cowl. We've got a carbon vent that lets some of that turbo heat out, because, twin turbos on that motor is going to make some heat under that hood. So we wanted to be able to get that heat out of there, but we've got carbon there. We've got carbon mirrors on the side, and we've got a carbon spoiler that's custom made for this car. And that's one of those products that, I was talking about, where we came up with things that we'll be able to sell. And that's one of them. Now we've got a carbon fiber spoiler for a G body. Another thing we did was the vents that are in the door jambs by the striker, where they're stock. They're a big plastic kind of air, fresh air draw deal,
like an accordion style.
Yeah, super ugly looking things. We made billet ones of those that are now available, and then we came up with some hood poppers that act as hood adjustment pins as well, but they've got springs in them. So when you pull your hood, the hood pops up, and there's no big, that 1980s GM spring that was 5 inches long.
Oh yeah.
They can get rid of that and put those in there. And those are all things that came about because, they needed to be on this car and nothing existed. Right. And that goes back to, we were talking about those guys in the 50s where you couldn't just order stuff. They had to make everything, because there was no ordering a custom hood latch for whatever they were building, So we're kind of doing that same thing where you want something different, nothing's available. So you make the darn thing, and then hopefully people like it and they'll want it too, and buy some of them. And that's what we try to, innovate with every one of these builds we do is come up with stuff that people are going to want to use on their builds, and that makes sense. Not just looks good, but performs and functions better than factory. And then on top of it, look good. That's the key.
No, that's really great. And you mentioned the front and rear valences on the Buick, and all of the GM G-body cars kind of suffered from the same shortcoming, let's say, which is that at the time, plastic was still kind of a relatively new material for the exterior of the car, right? And so they were having they had these big molds that they would produce, and they were sort of tacked onto the car, but they were never really integral, if you know what I mean. Like,
Right.
there was always a gap and a seam, and it just didn't look so great.
And those were pretty massive on the Grand Nationals, the gaps and the seams, and that, especially in that front bumper, boy, there was a lot going on.
Yeah, so to clean that up alone, man, I'm really excited to see this car now. I'm actually kind of fixated on it.
Yeah, it came out pretty smooth. I think we're all real excited with what we came up with on the front end of that car, and one of the things too, if you can envision that Grand National, so if you imagine the line behind the headlight was running at an angle, kind of from back to front, sliding towards the ground, and then it did a sharp turn and went perpendicular to the ground, just went straight down, and that's where that plastic bumper and everything mounted. The first thing we did was we kept that line going straight. So the body line behind that headlight that runs at like a 45 down towards the ground, towards the front, we extended the fender to match that line. So you just have one continuous flowing line, and then that whole front valance that we came up with, that's all based off of that line and goes forward from there. So we just tried to smooth everything out and really, kind of get rid of some of that bulk. And honestly, they had some pretty hard corners and hard edges on those
Yes.
plastic pieces,
Yes, they did. And it interrupted the flow. So again, another Ringbrothers signature look, right? You streamline and improve what's already there. You refine it. But
yeah, then that's the goal with every one of these cars we do is to try to think about, how we can smooth this out, how we can make it, not have anything that jars you, right? If you're tracing your eyes down the length of the entire car, if something kind of jars your field of view, well, let's talk about that. What is it and why did that happen and what can we do different?
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, what do you do to unwind? You're a biker, right? I mean, you got Harleys.
Yep.
And Wisconsin is known for its amazing county roads and highways, and spring and summertime, you got all kinds of great places to roam. So is that how you unwind on two wheels?
I'm pretty fortunate, to live here and to have grown up here as well. But like we all are around this area, it's just gorgeous. But yeah, for myself, I have about a 30-minute commute, which for me is just perfect. Because the road that I take to get to work and from runs along the river. It's winding. It's up the hills, down the hills. It's gorgeous. I tell you what, yesterday, Halloween, October 31st, I was on the bike. And that's pretty rare. It's for it to be that temperate, here in Wisconsin at, even today, I mean, it was in the 50s. If I wasn't at work, I would have been on the bike middle of the day. It was gorgeous. And, such a beautiful part of the country. And yeah, you're right. Those roads, if you're in a car or you're on a bike, they're pretty hard to beat as far as, you got some twists and you got some hills and just rolling, and the roads are nice, right? We don't have massive potholes everywhere. A lot of times, these roads are in just immaculate condition. It's just such a pleasure. And yeah, that's, primarily how I unwind at the end of the day is, just on that bike. And sometimes I don't go directly home, or sometimes I'll go home and decide that, I'm just going to keep on going right past the house and chase the sun for a little bit. And that's I tell you what, we're pretty fortunate around here to have that luxury just right out our front door,
Tell me about your bike.
So I've got a number of them. My daily 36-year-old Harley Davidson Electric Glide, and that's how I like it. There's nothing that could go wrong on that bike out on the road that I probably couldn't fix, in a farmer's driveway if he lend me some tools. And that's that makes it pretty fun. It makes it interesting and sometimes frustrating, but having that older stuff is fun. But that's the daily. Aside from that, I've got a 75 shovel head kick only 4-speed rigid. Kiwi spear front end. Yeah. That one's a lot of fun. And the day to day, at the end of the day, after I've been here, 10, 11 hours, I don't always be jumping up and down on a 75 shovel head trying to get the thing to start. So the push button on the Electric Glide is nice, but I've got a 78, and then I've got a bike that I intend on running at Bonneville someday. I want to get my red hat. I want to hit 200 miles an hour on a motorcycle and get my red hat. That's that's a bucket list item for me. And I've got the bike. I just have to finish it and get my butt out there.
That's awesome. I would love to do that too. It's probably not going to happen for me. I mean, it's a little bit of a pipe dream, but I would love to do it in a hot rod, a 32 or something, a coupe, 32 coupe. That'd be really fun.
Awesome. Yeah. I've got some buddies that have made runs out there, and, even if I don't get the red hat, I'll be out there someday. I'll make that run.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about the bikes is lately I've had a hankering for like a Harley bobber,
Sure.
It doesn't matter. An older bike, obviously, but a bobtail would be so much fun. Just how raw they are.
Right. Yeah, my 75, the one I was talking about, the 4-speed kick only 75 with the Kiwi Springer front and stuff, that would be considered a bobber by most rather than a chopper. It doesn't have a big long front end. It's real nice and compact, and that one is a fun bike to ride. I rode that one from Wisconsin to Missoula, Montana, and then up to Glacier National Park, and that was a trip. I don't think I'd do it again on that bike. That was no suspension and mechanical drum rear brake only, no front brake, jockey shift, foot clutch.
Oh yeah.
Little
lot going on.
Little 2-gallon gas tank. You got to, I had to bungee cord a little spare fuel cell to the back fender, because there's spots you get out there, Wyoming, Montana, where you don't have a gas station for 150 miles. And when your bike will only go about 110 before you're out of fuel, that makes walking a concern.
But man, oh man, I can just picture you riding west and like being on the Great Divide, and you go from those plains and you start climbing.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, it was wild. I tell you, going through Beartooth Pass, and then I camped out in the Bighorn Mountains. And before I got, to my final spot, which was Glacier, that was the goal. But just starting to climb, and you really feel, you feel transported right to another time frame. And especially when you're on something old, I don't care if you're on an old car or you're on an old motorcycle, if you're out there and you're not seeing anybody else, as far as you're concerned, it might as well be the 60s or the 70s.
Sure.
It feels like it,
well, that's why we love the old stuff, right? Because it transports us in more ways than one.
Right.
I'm so excited for you guys. I wish I could be there this week. SEMA 2024, November 5th through 8th in Las Vegas, Nevada. Everybody follow Ryan at FabGuy_Ryan on Instagram. And of course, the Ringbrothers at Ringbrothers. There's also the website, ringbrothers.com. Ryan Fielding, Chief Fabricator of the Ringbrothers. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a real pleasure to talk with you. I wish you could make it to SEMA as well. We're real excited to show these cars to everybody, and I'll look forward to your feedback after you see what we brought here next week.
I can't wait, man. All right. Hey, have fun in Vegas.
Yeah, buddy. You know what? Absolutely. I'm looking, and I tell you what, there's a lot of builds I'm looking forward to see out there too. It's so neat. The friendships and partnerships you make with people throughout this industry. And then you talk throughout the year of, what everybody's bringing. And there's a few of them that I'm pretty excited to see. And we've been pretty tight-lipped with one another, a little jostling back and forth, shop to shop, fab guy to fab guy. And it's fun. We and now, that's getting down to the deadline. We're kind of messing with each other a little bit. And that's always fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing a bunch of our old friends out there and reconnecting and seeing all these great builds that everybody's going to be bringing.
Reunions are the best, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Hey, listen, do me a favor. Say hi to Jim and Mike for me, will you?
I can do that, sir. You bet.
All right, my friend. Ryan Fielding, thanks again.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage to support the show and subscribe on YouTube. You can also find us on Instagram and at horsepowerheritage.com. I will see you back here on Wednesday, November 20th for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.